Welcome to the Truth, Love, and Freedom podcast. This show is dedicated to de-occulting critical information in service of truth, while offering viable solutions firmly rooted in love, objective morality, and natural law. Here are your hosts, Paul and Lauren Bell.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome to the first episode of the Truth, Love, and Freedom podcast. Since this is our first episode, we wanted to dedicate it to Mark Passio. His work on natural law and morality is really what's inspired us to do the one great work.
We've both been on a process of truth discovery for a long time, and then when we got together, we both came across Mark Passio's work on whatonearthishappening.com, started listening to his podcast, and we both felt that he was able to streamline this information in a way that was really easy to comprehend and made it simple to communicate the truth to people.
Yeah, definitely check out Mark's work, and he's got a bunch of other great content on his website, the One Great Work Network. And speaking of truth, I think we should just jump right into our content for our first episode.
Okay, here we go. Here we have a quote from Soren Kierkegaard. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true. The imagery here on the slide is representative of the Fool card, and this also is representative of humanity and the foolishness of our ways of believing either of these two choices, and that's the root of all human suffering.
So, big question, does truth exist? Can it be known? So it's two questions, and really they need to be answered before we go very far down this path, because it doesn't really make sense to explore truth if it doesn't exist, and it doesn't make sense if it can be known. So we're going to answer this question. We're going to answer it a lot. We're going to answer it for a long time, hopefully, for you, but spoiler alert, it does.
And it can be known. I remember when I was younger and I saw this Time magazine cover on the coffee table, and it seemed to be so clearly about much more than just a political debate, as the whole idea of truth being dead or not even existing is one of the most common logical fallacies. To say that the only truth is that there is no truth is a self-defeating statement. You're making a proclamation of truth as you're saying it. Therefore, truth must exist.
Yeah, St. Thomas Aquinas actually said it really nice in the 13th century. He wrote, "The existence of truth is self-evident. For whoever denies the existence of truth grants that truth does not exist. And if truth does not exist, then the proposition truth does not exist is true. And if there's anything that's true, then truth exists." So that help you answer that question, I hope. So this next slide we have here from one of my favorite teachers, Terence McKenna. It says, "The truth can take care of itself. It does not require your belief." And you could go on to say, it also doesn't care what you think about it. It doesn't care if you understand it. It doesn't care if you believe in it. It still is. It's kind of like the law of gravity, right? Like if you don't believe in it, it doesn't care. And you might get away with it for a while, and you might see things that you wonder, why are these happening this way? Because I don't believe in the law of gravity. And then someday you're going to fall really hard on your face. And that's kind of how it is with truth too. Suffering is pretty proportionate with how close or how far you are away from truth. And the more we live in harmony with truth, the more our lives are going to be bountiful and flourish. And the farther we are away from truth, the more we're going to suffer.
It's in direct proportion to it.
And we try to teach our children these things, that's like kind of really simple. The more you go away from things they're trying to teach you, the harder your life is going to be. And it works for grown-ups too.
The process of truth discovery takes many forms and shapes. We're going to go through them. One of the first is an axiom, and it is a Greek word meaning that which commends itself to be self-evident, such as universal truths and natural law, like the sky is blue, 1 and 1 makes 2. Now, there's other things that appear to be self-evident, but in fact are only theory, such as the Darwinian theory of evolution or statism.
Theory.
And so having a fundamental understanding of natural law and the way that truth works is critical to our process of discovery.
Yeah, I like that. Like an axiom is it's used a lot in mathematics, and it's kind of just it's the building blocks of where you find other truths and you understand certain things. So once we've got this proof and we've got this that we know is true, we've proven it to be true through a lot of different methods, then we can use that as a foundation to build other things upon and always come back to that truth. And it works through all truth discovery as long as we have the building blocks of the things that we really understand. And for truth with a capital T, that is natural law. One of the other processes that I really love to talk about, and it's something that is so critical to everything that's going on in the world today, but this is using the trivium process. And this is a esoteric tradition. It goes back a long ways, and this is a process that was used to raise the children up, and not just raise them to be grown-ups, but raise them consciously. And the idea is that what we've got on our slide is a tree where the roots of the tree are the first stages of the trivium. So grammar, which is basically the understanding of the language and the words and the way to understand concepts. It also could be called the knowledge aspect, the bringing in of the information, and computing. It's called input. And so this part of the process happens first because you can't really go beyond anything else until you have the language to understand processes and things. So once that's in place, we move on into the logic piece, which is learning how to process that information. So you take in the information, now what do you do with it? We have to filter through, we have to remove logical fallacies, we have to understand the structure of the way that things flow to make sure that there's logic throughout statements. And then that's also called process in computing. And then the last step of the trivium process is the rhetoric, which is basically where you're putting out the information you have. It is your wisdom, essentially. It's the creation that comes from your understanding. So that is all put together in these classical traditions, along with the quadrivium to make up the 7 liberal arts.
Here's a quote from Arthur Schopenhauer. He says, "Every truth passes through 3 stages before it's recognized. In the first, it is ridiculed. In the second, it is opposed. And in the third, it is regarded as self-evident." Anyone who knows a little bit of history knows that this is true. Prohibition is one example, at slavery. At one point, people thought that it was right and it was okay to do that. In fact, appealing to even the fallacy of history, we've always done this. But it's not, obviously, the right thing to do. Appeal to tradition. However, maybe we can take some comfort in the idea that we're on that path and we're in the process of it, and to find our community and our network and keep teaching this.
It's probably pushing all of us towards our destiny a lot faster, whichever destiny we already had before that. So I think we can be comfortable with that. Maybe not comfortable, but just an understanding that is part of the process.
Well, clearly we have a lot of work to do to get to that place still of this being
self-evident.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. So, eliminating logical fallacies, I talked about that a little bit for a second when we talked about the trivium, but to get into it a little bit more because it is important, and we will do entire episodes on that, I'm sure, in the future. But just as a basic understanding, the word fallacy, we have it split up like that on the slide on purpose, fallacy. It comes from the Latin word fallere, fallacia, which means to deceive. And it's no coincidence that when we say somebody is tricked by a lie or somebody believes a lie, that they fall for it. And so it's basically a deception, misleading or false notion or belief. There's lots of different versions of them. And like I said, we'll get into them a little bit deeper, but being able to understand what they are, how to identify them, and then remove them. And a lot of times what's left is nothing. And if something is still standing once you've done that, then it's probably truth, at least with a little t.
And this, again, just like you're saying with it being fall as part of it, the fool also represents folly. Here's a quote. We're not sure really who it's from.
Not anonymous that puts out all the ominous stuff, but
when an honest man discovers he is mistaken, he will either cease being mistaken or cease being honest. To say I was wrong is probably one of the hardest things for people to do. We don't want to admit our mistakes. We don't want to be embarrassed, so it can be really hard to admit that we're wrong. However, if we don't, we'll cease to be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like basically if you understand something to be a certain way, you recognize that you're mistaken and you don't have the will, the capital W, to change that, then you turn dishonest. You're lying to yourself at that point. You're in opposition with what you understand to be true, which is living a lie.
And you have to take responsibility for your actions and live up to that, admitting that you're wrong and making the changes that are necessary in order to become an honest person again.
Yeah, sadly, most people are just too lazy to do that. It takes work to change. Truth discovery, first principles, we know that's redundant, but it makes sense to us as well. So we know principles means first, right? First things, but we put first principles because there are some things that need to be the first things. And very clear by this picture, what we're trying to represent is that the cornerstone for principles is morality. Everything comes from that. Really, that is principles. It is morality. And it's basically morality at its essence is knowing the difference between right and wrong. And what if there is an easy way to determine the difference between right and wrong?
Well, that's called natural law.
Well, there you have it.
Natural law can be defined as a set of universally binding, immutable, non-man-made, unchanging, ever-present laws that order the universe and govern the consequences of our behavior in the world as beings with the capability of self-awareness and higher awareness.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, understanding natural law is the solution for individuals and the aggregate, basically to end suffering and slavery that humanity is in right now. So that is why we are dedicating our time to teaching natural law, and it's going to make up a good part of our podcast moving forward. So you're going to hear the words natural law come out of our mouths a lot, and if you keep listening to us, you're going to become extremely knowledgeable about natural law. That's one of our goals. We've got a slide here that depicts the golden rule, and it's got a lot of different traditions shown here, different religious and spiritual traditions, and each one of them has a different version of the golden rule, and it's basically the only law, and it's said a bunch of different ways in different traditions. And one of the things when you're searching for truth that you have to at least accept is likely true is that when you look across a lot of traditions and you're filtering through all these different stories and allegories and information, that when you find a certain tenet that is a theme throughout that seems to go on, and you can pull it out of all these different ones, and it's really simple and it makes a lot of sense, that you could feel pretty good about understanding that to be truth. And while all of the different traditions have different ways of saying it, what I would say, don't just believe, but understand to be the most accurate way, or one of the most accurate ways to express this particular universal law would be to actually say, what you do to others will be done to you. So we're not going to go through all the other examples that everyone uses, because a lot of them say it in a much nicer way, like you should think about your neighbor and things such as that. But what it boils down to is that the reality is this is karma. And I don't know why all the world religions kind of fall short of saying it in that way. I don't know if it's too harsh for people don't want to hear it, but that's the truth.
With that in mind, the true golden rule is actually to do no harm, but take no shit. We have to have this non-aggression principle coupled with the self-defense principle. Otherwise, we're acting as doormats and allowing ourselves to be walked over. Kindness is virtue, but so is standing up for what is right.
This golden rule is the one that our kids like to say a lot for some reason. I don't know. I don't know if it's because they're allowed to say shit when they say it, but it is fun to say, and it's just so true, and it's such a basic understanding of things. And I think when you put it out there that way, it's empowering as well, because it's in essence the balance. It's the balance that we kind of show on the slide, that you have to have both pieces of the puzzle. You don't want to get walked all over, and obviously you don't want to be violating people's rights either, so you balance that with the do no harm and the take no shit.
Well, because when you balance it, you realize, understanding the golden rule, that you actually have a moral obligation to do something, to stop wrong when you see it occurring. And it's about the balance that we see in nature.
Here we have an example of that. So some important things to kind of put as a foundation. Most people have some understanding of this concept, but we want to make sure that everybody does that before we move on. So there's basically two different hemispheres of the brain, and it's basic brain science that's used in human psychology as well as like neurology. And like Laura was saying, that's kind of an example of the law of polarity and the law of gender. So you see we've got the masculine and the feminine aspects laid out. So we've got on the masculine, which is the left side of the brain, is where the origins are for the processes of the things to do with logic and analytics and strategy, science, reasoning, etc. And then on the feminine, the right side of the brain, is where all of the creativity, emotion, passion, etc. all originates. But one thing that's kind of interesting is, if you look into it, that when you find somebody who's like outstanding at, say, music, somebody who's just an outstanding composer or something along those lines, that those people, even though the seed of their talent and their muse originates in their right brain, they have like a phenomenal amount of neurological connections going into the other side of the brain, where the logic takes these things and processes them and creates something else. And so it's kind of like the sum of the two parts is greater than each other when they comes together, and it's an example of harmony in nature. I think it's amazing. It happens with like genius inventors, visionaries. This thing comes from this place and we don't know where it comes, and then it goes into their amazing analytical genius minds, and then they come up with these new inventions and amazing technologies for us.
And it's not just about the balance of both brain hemispheres. This is also about a balance of the physiological, the psychological, the spiritual, the energetic. It's all has to be in harmony and in balance with each other.
Yeah, as above, so below. It's in all the different planes. We've got this balance playing out over and over, and it's on the macro and on the micro.
So what are rights? This is a big question. Some people think that rights are relative, and
Wrong.
what is wrong? But really, it's very simple. Right is any action that doesn't cause harm to another sentient being, and wrong is any action which initiates harm to another sentient being.
It seems incredibly simple. All right,
Really
mic drop. That's our last podcast. We just sorted it all out. So thanks for listening. Just kidding. We got a lot more to talk about, but it really is that simple, right? It's an axiom. It's a fundamental principle, and it deserves repetition. So, a right is any action that does not initiate harm to another sentient being. You have that right. I have that right. Every being has that right. And a wrong is always any action which initiates harm to another sentient being. Got it?
It's a really easy way to figure out if you should take an action or not. Does it cause harm? If it does, don't take it. Here we have transgressions against natural law and things that are considered actual wrongs. What causes harm? There are 8 transgressions against natural law: assault, rape, trespass, theft, exploitation, coercion, willful lying, and murder. All of these are a form of theft, essentially. It's a form of theft of your safety, your sexual energy, your physical belongings, and even your life in case of murder. And remember, with the golden rule, what you do unto others will be done unto you.
And I'd say the silver rule, which isn't a thing, but it would be don't steal, right? So if you say, I've got the golden rule, it's do no harm, take no shit, and then the silver rule is don't steal, which already is covered by the golden rule, which is harm, but still don't steal covers it all. It's that simple. Don't steal, and we're all good. We got here kind of a breakdown, a difference between force and violence. So force is the capacity to do work or cause physical change. It's energy, it's strength, all positive things. With violence, it is the immoral initiation of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain. With force, it's actions which are in harmony with morality and natural law because they do not violate others' rights. Violence is coercive action, which is in opposition to morality and natural law because it violates others' rights. With force, it is an action which one always possesses the right to take, and it includes defense against violence. And violence is an action which one never has the right to take. And that's what people need to understand, is when somebody initiates violence on another person, what they actually are energetically doing is they are giving up their right to not be harmed to the person they are initiating harm against. And we teach that to our children, that your rights disappear. You literally hand your right to not be harmed to someone when you come at them to initiate harm. Not really a smart thing to do.
It's important to make this distinguishment between force and violence, because a lot of people will think that if you hit someone back after they punch you, that you're being violent, and you're not. You're using your force to defend yourself. And there's a very important distinction to be made there.
The rule in school was always whoever threw the last punch got in trouble. And I always thought that was such an injustice when I'd see it happen. Somebody that just get jumped in the hallway or something.
Well,
the teacher comes out right when they
it.
swing and the books are flying and they're like, "You're out of here," and everybody's like, "No." They had a right to do that.
It does matter who started it.
Yeah,
it always matters who started it.
And then the other side that we have to remember is that we have to be able to discern the difference between that, obviously, like when we see it in action, and then we have a moral obligation to stop violence, not force, but violence when we see it or we know it's being committed. We have a responsibility to do that, and being able to respond, a responsibility. You as a human have that responsibility to other human beings, and you got to use righteous force.
But again, leading to that responsibility, you do need to understand that there's certain circumstances where a little old lady can't go and defend herself, and she is going to need somebody to help her, and who is responsible. Or if a woman is witnessing a crime, the little old lady might not have the pistol in her purse to defend herself or defend someone else. So
Well, ultimately,
You know,
we
it's
are
about
brother's
who is
keeper, right?
able.
Like,
Exactly.
That's the thing, is that and for this great human experiment to work, that we have to live our lives like that. That it's not just about me, but it's about my neighbor that doesn't have that ability, and that the people that do have the responsibility all have a responsibility to look out for the people that don't, and that should be pretty simple.
Here we have another very simple tenet, really, is the law of freedom. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality decreases, freedom decreases.
Yeah, and that's another one of those as above, so below, like aggregate individual things. It works, natural law set it up this way, or not natural law, but it was set up as a tenet really of natural law. And so people need to understand that, like, as individuals, as we make choices that are wrong, we lose our freedom. That's just the way it works. It just doesn't mean going to jail. We lose our freedom literally, and as we increase our morality, we start to make good choices, then we start to get the blessings of the universe. We're working in harmony then with natural law, so it goes from being like a prison planet, or it goes from being slavery to being freedom with a lot of like unlimited possibilities, and magical things can happen when we start to actually be in harmony.
Right.
And morality is the key.
Just as depicted in this Alex Gray painting of the destructive world, where, as we know, polluting the environment and doing all of these harmful things to the earth is not aiding our freedom. However, if we were choosing to live by natural law and living a moral life, then we may be able to create the abundant world that you see on the other side of that tree.
Yeah, I think it's called Gaia tree or something like that. It's
Yeah.
a pretty powerful image, honestly. So there's a esoteric spiritual question often asked of initiates coming into the mystery schools. It's kind of a bodhisattva question, and the question is, how do you know if you are suffering? And the answer is, if anyone is suffering. And it's pretty basic. It's an understanding that as long as there are people that are suffering, we all have work to do. It's kind of the same thing as we talked about, like taking care of the people that can't take care of themselves for whatever reason. They don't have that. So people need to understand that if we don't do this, if we don't understand this, that we get to keep coming back and doing it again until we do understand it. And basically we need to use truth to free ourselves and everyone else from the slavery of suffering.
Here's a quote from Confucius. He says, "To know and to not do is to not yet know." And this is really powerful, because a lot of people think that they know, and yet they're not doing anything about it. And we're seeing this a lot in the modern age right now with the keyboard warriors, of people who claim to know, but you look at what they're doing and they're not doing anything. They're not actually trying to make change happen in the world, to better the world. They're simply spouting out knowledge that they think they have. And it's not really true knowledge until you apply it to the world.
We understand that as we've gone down this path and come to know things, that what comes along with that is a responsibility to truth. It's kind of like the idea that if you know that the bridge is out on the road, you have a responsibility to make sure that the cars stop, that they don't go down that road. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And it applies to a lot of different things, but we wanted to put this out there because the truth is that if you're not doing something to teach others the truth, then you don't know the truth yet.
And in fact, you're part of the problem.
What is the one great work? First, it's understanding the answer to the question I asked you earlier. The truth does exist. It's understanding that morality is objective, not subjective, and we're going to talk that to death, but it's not open for discussion. It is the truth. It's about understanding natural law. It's about aligning your thoughts, the mind, your emotions, spirit, to take action, body, that are based in truth. And it's teaching others truth, morality, and natural law. So that's the definition of the one great work, and you'll hear us reference that as well, but that's kind of a reference point for you to understand that is what we mean by the one great work.
So I think it's important to define the difference between nescience and ignorance. A lot of people think ignorance is bliss, right? However,
one of the stupidest things people say.
Nescience, Latin verb nesciere, to not know, because knowledge is absent or unattainable. This is like the state of a child who doesn't have the mental faculties to be able to understand certain forms of knowledge. It's not even attainable for them. However, ignorance, from the Latin verb ignorare, is to not know even though necessary information is present, because the information has been willfully refused or disregarded.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question then is why? Why would people want to willfully choose to not know the truth about something? And the reason is because the truth can be really ugly and hard to swallow. And understanding truth means admitting you're wrong, which we already talked about that earlier. Like an honest man, when he knows that he's wrong, can either cease to be wrong or cease to be an honest man. And people don't want to be wrong because a responsibility comes along with that. Now you have to understand the truth. Once you understand something's not the way that you thought it was,
you have to change your behavior.
Yeah, and most people are too lazy to change their behavior. That's why there's so much obesity. That's why there's so much, addiction problems and stuff, because it takes the capital will, and it takes work, and it's not easy. And most people don't want to take the actions that the truth requires of them. And we're not trying to be negative, we're just being truthful. The journey to truth is a process of self-discovery. And there's a quote from Mark Passio here that kind of explains that there are only two mistakes one can make on the path to truth: not starting and not going all the way. And sadly, most people won't choose to even start that. And it's because they believe lies. It goes back to the very first Kierkegaard quote we had, right? They believe something is true that isn't, or maybe it's they believe something isn't true that is. I think it's that they believe something isn't true that is, because they
or they don't believe in truth at all.
That's what I'm saying. They don't believe in truth, so they don't start the journey. So that's the first part. They don't even believe it's there to start the journey. And then if they believe it's true and they start on the journey, there's so many freaking cul-de-sacs out there that have like pieces of truth and all these like different religions and things that feel right and that people connect with, and their intuition like tells them that this is something that's good, but ultimately it stops them from ever going all the way down that path where the capital T truth lies.
Yeah. There are big barriers that we face as humans in the process of realization of truth and understanding the true self. We have the five sense illusion, we have soul ego identification, we have subjective morality, the prison of being in the left brain consciousness, and institutionalized belief systems. Really, just like this quote says here, the only barriers to truth are the presumptions that you already have it. These illusions that you think are true, however, it's not the whole picture that you're getting.
Yeah, so the first one we have is the five sense illusion. Most people probably listening to this understand that there is more to the world than what we can see and touch and smell and taste and hear. We have enough evidence out there, unless you're completely ignorant, right, that we at least know that there's ranges of frequency and sound that we can't actually hear, but we know they're there. We have equipment that can tell us these things. We know that there's spectrums in color that we can't see with our eye, but we know that they're there. We know, so on the slide we have some of the stuff about the hidden messages in water, and we know that there's these things in a realm that we don't understand, but a lot of people don't. And that's one thing that's just going to stop you from going down the path, honestly, if you believe that everything that exists is just what I can touch and taste and feel, and this is it. And it really even comes to this: people think that this is the world, like what I see right here, like this is who I am, and this is all that's real. And that's a cul-de-sac because we're spiritual beings having a physical existence, and it's a dance, it's a duality, and that we are connected to that place. We came from that other place, and we're going to go back there. And when people actually begin to understand that, there's a whole world that gets unlocked to you, and you can start to understand some truth about some things.
When we move into the barrier of self-realization, that is soul ego identification, we get into some pretty dangerous territory, and this is one of the biggest problems that we face in humanity. Soul ego identification is defined as solipsism in a way, and it is really the most dangerous ideology, as we say here on the slide. It is the belief that the world only exists in the mind, and that the truth is based solely on perceptions, as we were just saying with the five sense illusion that many people get caught in. It allows people to wrongly assume that there is no objective truth. It can lead to very dangerous paths, as we'll be talking about.
It's honestly heartbreaking because most people are solipsists. Really, if you talk to them and you actually start asking the right questions, people that you would just think there's no way that they actually think this way, they really do. We've got a slide here straight from the Church of Satan's website where they're explaining clearly that they take sacred spiritual symbolism and pervert it. The inversion of truth, sacred symbolism and knowledge propagated by the media and entertainment industry, that you are the arbiter of truth. It's the my truth movement. And people say that all the time, my truth. Well, my truth is this. Well, my truth is this. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. Now, you may have your perception of what happened or your
experience,
your take on things, your experience, and that's all very real and it means something. But just because your truth is that something that actually happened and didn't happen because you're in denial, it doesn't make that true. It doesn't work that way. And you see on this slide, you got some sacred Kabbalah things with the five-pointed human there, and then the satanic inverted version of that pentagram where they have the Baphomet and the star, and they've taken the crown chakra basically, and they've buried spirituality deep into the ground.
So the next barrier to truth and self-realization is subjective morality, and this stems right out of solipsism and Satanism. And here again, from the Church of Satan's website, we have them answering this question: why do Satanists worship the devil? Well, as they say here, we don't. Satanists are atheists. What we're saying here is that if you follow solipsism, and if you believe that morality is subjective, you are a default Satanist.
People need to understand that they hold the same ideology as Satan worshipers. And so many people, it's so sad, so many people, so many like otherwise conscious people, and they think that it's somehow some kind of like a understanding thing to basically give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and he's like where he's at, and we've got to meet people where their truth is, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. All the world religions talk about the golden rule, right? We went through that earlier and showed a lot of those. And the satanic golden rule is do what thou will. That is the whole of the law. Obviously completely missing the point of the golden rule. They're claiming basically that because you want to do something, you have the right to do it. And it really, nothing else matters. That's just not how it works.
That way.
It's partially true. You do have the right to do whatever you want.
So long as
it doesn't harm another sentient being. The world is set up currently to keep us trapped in our left brain. An active effort to keep us, cut off from our feminine side. It's been happening for a long time. Our whole society is set up as paternal. In a lot of religions, they've crushed the feminine piece of things and have everybody trapped in this left brain paradigm. They're caught in a five sense illusion. There's this whole disconnection from emotional expression and the feminine aspect of self. There's a complete lack of imagination. In fact, people are told that they shouldn't imagine things because it's dangerous to imagine things, and things need to be the way that they've always been. And there's also a prison in the right brain too, and we aren't talking about that on these slides because there's not nearly as many people trapped there. There are plenty of people trapped in a right brain prison. If you go to a New Age conference or a psychic convention, you'll probably meet a lot of them there. Not everybody there, but there's a lot of people that are completely in that right brain piece. But people in the left brain, their choices and their actions lack critical balance between thoughts and emotions, and that's where we become kind of at least secondary psychopaths when we're trapped in a left brain prison.
Well, the reason they want to keep us trapped in our left brain is because it really keeps us from using our imagination, and that's why it's a prison of the left brain. And you hear people say it all the time. You suggest an alternative for the way that things are in the world today, and they say, I can't even imagine that. It's a prison.
Another reason that they want to keep us trapped in the left brain, the big they, and someday we'll talk about who we believe that they are, but until then we'll just call them they, because that's what everybody calls them. But they don't want us to be able to consciously align our mind with our spirit so that our actions are in harmony with truth and natural law. It's that simple. If you are trapped in one side of your brain, there's no way to ever get to that piece where things are happening in a balanced, harmonious way.
We want to talk about the knowledge that is hidden to us. And the word occult literally means hidden knowledge. You ask anybody what this means, and probably like 95% of people will tell you it means evil or devil worshipping or witchcraft or cult, because they don't hear you correctly. No one seems to know what this word means, and it's a really great way to keep people from looking into things.
Yeah, it's almost like they've occulted the meaning of the word occult.
So weird.
Which is very meta.
It really simply means hidden or to hide. And we use the magician here because it doesn't mean evil. Using the knowledge of natural law and this universal wisdom can be used for good or evil. It is a tool. As the magician is holding his wand, it is simply a tool. It depends on how you use it.
Well, the difference between the magician or magic and sorcery comes down to, in magic, they use the capital will along with the words and the understanding of those things, and in sorcery they use the lowercase will, ego, self-will.
Yes.
And
there's a big distinction to be made between the ego will and the higher self will, which is willpower. What you discover when you go on your process of truth discovery, because it is a process of self-discovery.
So that's what we're wanting to do here, is de-occulting truth. So that's just uncovering, unhiding it. So when you hear that terminology, don't think that we're doing some weird mumbo-jumbo magic. We're just trying to uncover truth that has been intentionally hidden. And this quote is kind of what that's about. It's a quote from Adolf Hitler. Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they'll believe it. And the big lie is that truth doesn't exist and it can't be known. Because it does and it can't.
Moving on with our barriers to the discovery of truth, we have the institutionalized belief system. And there's many. Here's a quote from Terence McKenna. He said, "Culture is not your friend." There's been a lot of harm that has been caused by these institutionalized belief systems. They keep us divided from each other. They keep us away from truth. As Paul mentioned before, a lot of them are cul-de-sacs. They give you parts of the truth, but not all of it. And so people get lured into these things, and it becomes a part of who they are. They identify as a Republican, as a Christian, as a, you name it. And it's a barrier to us actually realizing the truth. We need to step away from this false belief in authority, which is one of the other barriers.
This imagery, it's pretty powerful. It actually comes from a long time ago. This is reminiscent of a really poignant line from Bob Marley's Redemption song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. It's true. All of the power of the false authority comes from people believing that it's legitimate. So the false authority itself isn't the one that's actually perpetuating harm. It's the people that believe in it. And when the people stop believing in it, and it's that simple, we don't need a bloody revolution. We just need people to say, no, I'm not a part of this anymore.
To conclude this first episode, we just want to share, to bring it back around to the light, and because we want to focus on the solutions here to our problems in the world. And the big task of the One Great Work, which we're all here to do, is to demystify the occult, to demystify this knowledge that has been hidden from us, to empower ourselves with it. And that's a way of freeing this integral knowledge. It's bringing the truth to people's awareness and using generational education to properly raise the younger generations, really raising them, raising their consciousness. That's our task for the One Great Work.
And it's not an easy one, and it's honestly, we're probably at a pretty big deficit right now. We're up against a lot. Looking at that slide that we had earlier with the institutionalized belief systems and seeing all those different organizations and things depicting the media and the government and money and all these things, it's surprising that you and I are sitting here today, or that the people that are watching or listening to this are even here able to take in the truth with all the things that are stacked against them. And so one, congratulations for being where you are right now. We have a long ways to go together. We're just getting started, but we wanted to just kind of lay out for you today and share where we're coming from, the foundational things about what this is going to look like. We're going to continue to try to put together some really great material. We've got already a lot of exciting guests lined up for the future to do some interviews, and we're just going to pretty much rock through a lot of stuff together, and we look forward to being with you all on the next episode.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Make sure you share with your friends, people that you think might be interested in it, and check out our website, truthloveandfreedom.com.